Well, I'd like to officially welcome everyone to the fourth Wednesday. This is the series, this is the second in the series of Performance Technology in Action. And I'd like to introduce today's speaker. Leanne, you're on.
Hi, well, good morning or good afternoon, I guess, depending on what time zone you're in. So thank you, Judy, for inviting me to your fourth Wednesday. We want to talk about our community service project that ISPI sponsors and talk a little bit about, some of the benefits of it, as well as give the perspective of an individual who's participated in it. And I know I can't see everyone who's online, but I also had invited Tim Hunt to join me as well, who had worked on this project that we're going to share with you guys and talk a little bit about not only the impact to the community, but the benefit that we received as individuals. It was just a really, really tremendous opportunity and experience for us to work this project. So I am Leanne Jensen, and I am a director at ISPI right now, as well as a chapter leader for the Boeing virtual ISPI chapter. And Tim is also, he's a former president of our chapter at Boeing, and he is also our future incoming chapter president. So he has lots of experience there. And I don't know if anybody see if Tim is online. I'm not able to see, but okay. Well, we will.
No, he's not online.
Okay, I know he had a couple of meetings. He was going to try to join us. So I'd let him introduce himself, but if he's not here, I guess I just introduced him. So talking about our community service program that we have with ISPI, this is really it's a wonderful, wonderful opportunity to not just give back to the community, but to develop and grow professionals within human performance technology. There's a really great opportunities that we have. We usually will pair a project with a thought leader. And I know for our project, we got paired with Dr. Roger Addison, who was a tremendous help. So we got to learn from some subject matter experts. We got to introduce HPT and performance improvement to the community around us as well. And that's part of what we want to do is market, what in the world is it that we do? What's human performance technology? What does performance improvement really mean? So this community service projects give us that leverage that we can go and talk to others and kind of expand the knowledge base that we have in terms of, who knows what we are and who knows what we do. And the other reason why we have the CST is really just to grow those professional skills. So not just are you working with, thought leaders and mentoring communities, you're also developing your skills and knowledge. You're doing things that you might not have done before. I know if you guys are working in the corporate world, a lot of times you get kind of pigeonholed a little bit. You get really good at one element within our model, and you kind of become that expert, and that's really where you work. So these projects allow you kind of that breadth to spread your wings, and you can go and try different things. You can learn new things or work in an area that you traditionally wouldn't work in. So we have some guiding principles that we use for our projects, and we've referred to them as CSP for Community Service Project. But these are really to go globally and make an impact to the world around us. And we want to facilitate those networks that we have among our individuals. And today, I know as we were talking about before this started, with COVID, everyone seems to be going virtual, and that gives us a great opportunity to work worldwide and not just, learn from those in our own region, but learn from those around the world and really diversify our thoughts, our tools, how we're approaching subjects, and that is really invaluable. So we also leverage some opportunities here, and I know with the project that I'll be talking about, Tim and I leveraged a lot of other individuals within our project. We went to experts within who we work with at work, and they had been interested in volunteering. So whenever we saw an opportunity, we'd pull them in for a section as needed. So it was really great to get that kind of, other people involved and take advantage of their expertise and leverage some of those opportunities that they had. So our CSPs also follow our ISPI guiding principles, and we'll cover those in a minute. the history of the Community Service Project is we started kind of in 2014. We had an idea, and I think a couple of you guys on this call may have been part of that. So there's this idea set up that, hey, we can do this community service project. We can develop our members as well as give back to the community around us and have that world impact or that societal impact. So in 2015 was really the first launch. We did a soft pilot with the Settlement Music School, and they started documenting the process. What was lessons learned? What do we need to have in place to go forward? And then the first true trial of that process was in 2016, where we, ISPI, the Montreal chapter, led a project with the Kidney Foundation, and they were looking at how they can increase their fundraising and how effective was the fundraising that they had been working on. And this really was, like I said, our first attempt at using all of our processes that we put in place. And of course, we refined them as we went along. But after Montreal, it led to our Seattle project, which is Victim Support Services. And that's a project that we're going to go into a little bit more detail. And this was all about kind of the strategy and sustainability of the organization. And then in 2018, we worked with Second Harvest Food Bank down in New Orleans and how widespread their community reach was and making sure that they were always available when their community needed them. And then this past year, and this is an ongoing project, is we are working with Reap Goodness. And this is a global initiative where they're providing training, awareness, and resources for sustainability. They're looking at water sustainability or biosustainability, food sustainability, and they're teaching communities around the world how they can use land around them and not just deplete the resources, but continue to utilize that land and take care of it while getting the benefit from it. And there is a lot of training that's going on right now with that project. And like I said, the really interesting thing is it is global. They started it in Tucson or in Arizona area, and they have 2 other sites, pilot sites, that they're getting ready to work with. And I'm not sure the area. I want to say one's Asia and the other's Africa. I might be wrong on that, but they are going global now and piloting it in different areas and taking that information and providing feedback to what they're doing. So we do have kind of a really great history that's going on with these community service projects. And there has been, like I mentioned, a lot of benefit that individuals have gotten from this. And it's not just, the organizations themselves, but it's the team that's been working on these. So as part of our projects, we always focus on our principles and practices, our 10 standards. And we're going to walk through each of these standards as we use Victim Support Services as our case study. And you'll kind of see how we've outlined, what tools we've used for each of these and how the RSVP, our results, systemic views, values, and partnerships align with all the other elements we did. That's really the foundation of all of our activities. And you can see on the right hand of the screen is our performance improvement model. And this is really just kind of an overview of the process that we followed. And you can see, they kind of line up with what our practices is. Where's your need? How do you select the right design to, mitigate that need or close the gap, I should say. And then how do we evaluate going forward? So with that, I'm going to go ahead and get started with our overview for the Victim Support Services. And I do see that Tim Hunt has joined us. So hi, Tim. Good to have you.
Yeah, it was an interesting journey to get here, but I made it. So
good, we're glad to have you. So at the end of our conference in Montreal, they said, guess what, guys? ISPI is going to be having their conference in Seattle. And hey, Leanne, you live in Seattle. Any organizations you can think of that we might be able to do a community service project with? So I'm sitting on the airplane on the runway, getting ready to leave Montreal. And I said, you know what? I have a great organization that I think would benefit from us, and it's Victim Support Services. So I got on my phone and I emailed them before I even left Montreal and said, hey, would you guys be interested in doing this project? And, kind of outlined some of the services that we could provide for, pro bono consulting. And before I landed, I had a response in my email box that said, yes, let's set up a meeting and talk further. So who Victim Support Services are is they are a Washington-based organization who focuses on victims of crime. They are one of the first organizations in the nation who focused strictly on crime victims, and they were founded in 1975. Their founder had her daughter went missing and was found murdered. So the mother got together a bunch of other parents within the area, and they started talking about what they can do to move forward, and that really became what is Victim Support Services today. So they also run a statewide hotline, and so they do, anybody who has issues, they are answering those phones for crime victims across the state. And unfortunately, in times where we have mass violence occurring in other areas of the world or of the US, they do field a lot of calls from other states and outside of the Washington region. So, their whole mission is really just to support the victims through advocacy, education, and awareness. And I'm going to get into kind of when we first started working with them, what we thought, or at least I should say what they thought one of the areas we were going to work on was. So if we look at our first 4 principles of RSVP, we have to focus on the results of what we're doing. So we approached Victim Support Services, or what we call VSS, and we kind of went, hey, you know what, there's a couple areas we could help. We can do a performance needs analysis. We can do, an evaluation. If you guys have a specific goal in mind that you might want some help with, what's that problem we can do? And we had some initial conversation with the executive director, and we talked about, a couple of those options, and we ended up determining that a performance needs analysis would really kind of be the best thing to do. She was a new executive director to the agency, and I think she had been in her position about a month or 2 before I approached her. So she was still learning, everything that was going on. So she was very open and, kind of said, hey, you know what, let's really talk about where we want to go in the future and put together a strategic plan. So let's identify what the gaps are and then start designing how we're going to overcome those gaps. So we started our project with an introduction to PI, and Dr. Roger Addison came out and joined us and did kind of a little mini principles and practices workshop. So we met with the staff and the board of directors and tried to understand, what is the purpose of the agency, right? What are the results that we're expecting? What's the value that this agency focuses on and provides? We also took the systemic view of this, and obviously we worked in partnership because the staff and board were also present for this workshop. But the first thing that they said is, hey, we're a nonprofit agency. We need more money. We need funding. And we kind of said, well, okay, well, what would you do with that funding? What's the value that you create with that money? And not only the value, but what are the results? So we started talking, and, we kind of said, well, maybe it's not funding that we need. Well, obviously everybody needs money. But the real problem is we get all of our funding from governmental grants. And unfortunately, the grants come rolling in when there is violence is occurring in the community, especially mass violence. And that's not the kind of funding that they really want to have. They don't really, want to depend on, oh, geez, a tragedy is going to happen. We're going to have money to become sustainable. So we started looking at ways and defining, how do we become sustainable, or how does the agency become sustainable and lessen that reliance on the government funding? So we understood what the needs were, and we performed the gap analysis. We looked at, hey, where do they want to be in the future, and where are they right now, and what is valuable about where they want to be. And so that way we focused on just those elements that they would get value out of. After the workshop, we did a couple other workshops as well. So as I mentioned, we did a mini principles and practices workshop. We also did some other areas that we worked with them. And all of this came into play where the agency was able to create a vision statement of where they wanted to be. So we took all this information, and I know that there's a lot of words up there on the screen, but they said, this is where we want to be in the future. We want to be a national leader. we want to have a good business model. So that's kind of that funding that they started talking about. We ended up transforming into a sustainable business model, and they want to have the capacity to support all the victims that come to them. They don't want to have to ever turn anybody away or have a very short period of time with them if this individual needs more of their time. So they also wanted to focus on their training. And one of their visions is to have their training become a primary source of income. And then the last thing that kind of ties this all together is they wanted to become a passion-driven nonprofit. Or sorry, they wanted to go from a passion-driven nonprofit to a results-oriented business that is driven by passion. So there was a lot going on here, and it's a little busy, but this really sets the stage and that foundation of what we're going to do going forward with the rest of those ISPI practices. So as we start looking at the gap analysis, hey, we've got a vision. Now we can really start saying, where are we today? What do we need to do to close the gap? And what's causing everything that's occurring in that gap? So we took the big statement that they had, and it got distilled a little bit. And we said, our vision right now, or the need, is to provide uninterrupted service to the community. And we want to have that same level of passion that we've had for over 40 years. We don't want to take that passion away from anybody, but we also want to make sure that we're independent of those environmental influences that are happening with the government funding. So we used a couple tools as part of this. And a lot of this, as I mentioned, was set with the Principles and Practices workshop, where we did the gap analysis. We used cultural diligence to really look at the environment, what's going on around us, both in the community, where we looked at federal level, the community level, as well as internally. So, how is the culture of the agency itself? What might be barriers or enablers that are happening there? And we supplemented this with interviews and surveys. And so we went out, collected all this information, and really said, hey guys, here's what we need to focus on. And we did this working alongside everybody the entire way. So as we started kind of working on this, we were looking at, geez, what's causing these gaps from occurring? And one of the biggest things that we used, or the tools, was a statement of work mapping. And so we have a little example of it up here. But we looked at what are those barriers and enablers that they have within their agency that is either helping us or hindering us. And we broke it down to the criteria, behaviors, and behavior influences. So each of the roles that they had, we kind of sat down with them for a couple hours over, I think, 2 or 3 weeks, and said, hey, what are your responsibilities? And then for each of those responsibilities, how do you know what good looks like? What are the actions or the behaviors that you need to have to accomplish that criteria? And then what are those influences on there? And we ended up color coding them. Green was our enablers. The kind of yellow gold was, those are our barriers that we have. So this gave us a lot of information to go forward and start looking at, identifying the cause and prioritizing to say, this is where we think we need to move forward with. So as we went to designing our solutions for Standard 7, this is actually, I had a lot of fun with this, but we used a lot of tools, and a lot of the tools that we used related back to our first couple of sessions that we had with the agency. So that Principles and Practices workshop, the statement of work mapping, we did an environmental scan, we had some interviews and surveys that had taken place as well. That information, went into some of the design as well. And so if you are crafting your upfront work and partnering with other individuals, you're going to get a wealth of information that you can use throughout all of the standards. And so it's not just defined to, oh, wow, I only collected information for that gap. You can use that all throughout the entire life cycle, which is really amazing. And it takes, sometimes people, you guys are all experts on the phone, but sometimes people, when they hear about the process we follow, they just have this assumption, wow, all these steps are going to take so long to do. but it's a lot of this information already exists. So we did.
Hey, I'd like, if I can, Leanne, I want to add here that by immersing these folks for 2 days right off the bat, right up front, was, I think, huge, because we weren't trying to draw them in a little bit at a time. They were all in by the end of the second day, and just going through these processes and working together and using these tools, that in of itself was a huge benefit for getting them started down the right path.
Yes, and that did set the stage, and for especially that partnership portion of it, where they understood what we were there to do. Without those 2 days and having everybody together, I think it would have been a lot rougher moving forward, because there were individuals at first that were like, oh wow, there's this project going on, they're trying to eliminate my job, they're going to come in here and just tell us that we're doing everything wrong. And that 2-day workshop set that pace and kind of said, hey, we're actually here to help you guys, and any misconceptions that you have, we quickly were able to put those aside and kind of get down to work. So as part of our solutions, or designing the solutions, we also did a SWOT analysis. So we did a strength, weakness, opportunity, and threat, and Tim led that. And so we started looking at the data, and continuing on with those causes, with what's going on outside the agency, what's going on internally, and we used those to help craft those designs of what we wanted to go forward and implement. We also had an offsite. We had a 1-day workshop with both the board and the staff members. And this was, I'd say, a little bit difficult to pull off because everybody has such different schedules. But we had, I think, about 90% of the board of directors attended. They had a couple individuals that were not able to make it. And then about over half their staff made it as well. And so we asked them to take off, I forget if it was a Saturday or Sunday.
It was a Sunday.
It was a Sunday. It was on the weekend. So they gave up their entire day. And for a lot of these individuals, they had to drive 2 hours to get to where we held it. But we ended up working on so many great things there. And it showed the dedication of this agency to getting these solutions, out on the table. They brainstormed a lot, figured out what it is that they needed to do, and they wrote implementation plans at this point too. And this kind of gets into standard 8 for implementation. But yes, this was just, I think it was a phenomenal activity that we ended up going through to get this in the relationship building. They had identified a couple areas that they wanted to work on with the agency. Relationship building was one of those, and it was relationships both internal within the staff, internally within the board, and then kind of between the two of them. They wanted to have stronger relationships between the staff and the board. So they had a lot of relationships that were going on that they wanted to go and strengthen. So this 1-day event really started solidifying that, and they got to talk to one another, understand each other's perspectives, and hey, the staff might have been asking to do something, or wanting to move in one direction, and the board might have been saying, hey, it's not the right time, or we can't do it. And this offsite gave them the opportunity to have these conversations and say, hey, here's why, we heard your request, here's why we can't do it. And it went both ways, which was really cool, because before they just hear, oh, I got my answer, and there's no reasoning or rationale behind it. So that, like I said, did wonders for our relationship building.
As I look at this slide, I just if it's not clear, this takes place, all these different events and tools takes place over a series of months, right? And they all sequence together, so they build on each other as you go along. So it's kind of shown all together here, but it really is a sequence drawn over time. And that's kind of important, because they do a step, they use a tool, and then they build on it, and then they do a step, use a tool, and build on it, and go on from there. So that was also an important element of it, is keeping them engaged over time and keeping them involved in the process.
Mm-hmm. So as they were coming up with all these wonderful ideas, they had to also determine, how feasible are they? How likely are we to implement it? And how do we even prioritize them? So we've got a couple pictures of them multi-voting. but they ended up identifying the critical areas that they needed to influence. And we did some thematic mapping. So they grouped everything in kind of like groups. They voted on those themes, and then they down selected and prioritized. These are the most important to us to implement or to focus on. And we got them to really focus on 3 areas. And they had, I believe it was a total of 7 that they identified. And that wasn't saying that, you know, those other 3 areas or 4 areas aren't important. It's just, hey, we need to focus on these first 3, and then we'll have the resources and capacity to deal with the rest of them. So as part of this, they ended up focusing on, there's 4 overall areas. So the first of them was funding. And if you remember, this is what they came to us and started with and said, hey, we just want more money. People can just give us more money, we'll be happy. So they started looking at, okay, what portion of funding, what do we need to do different? And they came up with a couple ideas. One of them was to change their strategy. So this is going from reliance on the government funding and the grants to, hey, how do we change? How do we either create revenue or go after some additional donors? So they said, hey, you know what? We have a really great training program. We are nationally recognized for some of the training that we provide. Can we leverage it? And that became one of their strategies going forward underneath funding. And that was, hey, let's leverage our training. Let's see what we can do different. And then the other item was they wanted to do a better job of managing those individual donors as well as those companies. So those non-governmental grants, they wanted to say, you know, let's go ahead and manage those even better. So they also said, hey, as part of this, if we're going to change our funding strategy, we probably need to have some change management going on as well. And they said, hey, let's meet get together a transformation team. And this was Tim took the lead on this, and they came up with a couple board members as well as a couple staff members, and they led this transformation and met on a regular basis to talk about how things are going, what communication might be needing, you know, and communicating that progress. So not just receiving input from others, but they were communicating outwards as well. So the third area that they were focusing on was business. And part of that was transforming the funding strategy led to, hey, let's define the business. What does it look like to us? You know, we've been a nonprofit. We're still going to maintain our nonprofit, but how do we change like our whole business model from what we've used to be, you know, what we've been doing in the past? So some of that was, you know, we have this really great technology that we're working with. We're not using it to its full capacity. So how do we unlock the power of that and use that to make our business even better? And then, of course, we looked at the individual side of the business and said, hey, you know what type of opportunities can we give our staff for professional development? If we're going to be the best agency in the world, or actually they were in the nation, they weren't going for global domination at this point in time, but we worked on that. But they said, hey, to be the best in the nation, we got to make sure our people are always being developed. You know, they're always getting learning opportunities. They're keeping up with whatever is going on with the latest, you know, advocacy processes and methodologies. So the last one that we worked on, it kind of ties it all together, was the culture. And they said, hey, you know, we want to change this culture that we've had. And it ties into everything that we've been doing, the funding strategies, the business strategies. You know, hey, we're gonna change how we are communicating with the world around us, with our communities, with our staff, with our board members. And then they also said, kind of getting back to the business side about professional development opportunities, they also recognize that they need to develop a wellness strategy for their staff members. Dealing with victims of crime, it's a very, very difficult thing to do. Not everybody can take on that kind of a role, but it is mentally exhausting. And they said, you know, we got to make sure that we have a good plan that we can re-energize and give every client who walks in that door the same level of effort and not get drained and kind of, you know, just go, okay, you know, let's get through this, you know, get emotionally or upset. And we have seen individuals at the agency are impacted by what they're going through along with their clients. And so we wanted to make sure that they could handle that and not have to, take additional time off just as a result of it. We wanted to build that into what they were doing. So do you have anything to add for this, Tim?
Yeah, that last part of it, the well-being of the employees, that ends up being a very unique factor that contributes to the leadership model needed to run an organization like this, and therefore the culture of the organization. Because these folks are passionately driven, some people are actually energized by what's known as compassion fatigue or secondary stress syndrome, and others are can burn out by it, and so it was a key element that they weren't focusing on enough, and by highlighting that, we were able to point out some of the factors that were impacting their ability to do their work, and some people couldn't do it, and they didn't last long, and they had to leave for health reasons, and so that's a really important element of this type of work.
Yeah, thank you. So this is my favorite slide, but as we talk about our implementation and evaluation, so standards 9 and 10 as we move forward, this is really, Tim and I and the rest of the individuals that helped us with the community service project, we can't go and implement for them, but we can be there to assist and kind of be there behind the scenes, help them if they need to change direction. Hey, we tried this, it's not working. Can you help us come up with an alternative? Or, can we have a meeting and go through, a little mini workshop to help guide us? Another part of their big thing, as I mentioned earlier, was relationship building. So they ended up having, I think, a lot of fun. And I know I had a lot of fun with this, where we did just a lot of team building activities. So, you can see some of the smiles on the faces. We had them at their offsite with the board and staff for strategic planning. We had them do a couple activities that they had to figure out how to work together, and not just working together, but we gave them these problems that they had to think differently about. So this was really setting them up for designing, their business going forward in a different way. So we did a couple other activities. A lot of them were just with the staff. They had, as Tim mentioned, there are individuals that they came there, they worked for a while and realized, hey, you know what, this isn't for me. They had a lot of mental fatigue. It was a little bit more, took a toll on their mental health than they had originally expected. So they were getting new individuals, new staff members coming. So we would do team building activities as well. And one of the pictures here is the solo cup stacking. So you have to use a rubber band with string, work in teams to stack them in different orientations. And we competed, we split up the staff, and they had a couple teams that were competing against one another. But it taught them, how to work together, which was really important, especially as they were getting new individuals on board. They also had a lot of open houses to draw in the communities as part of their implementation plan. So I know Tim and I would go stop by their open houses and say hi. We have a picture showing the gentleman with the football. Was one of their activities that they were doing. They were kind of doing a photo booth during football season. So yeah, I don't know. Do you have anything else, Tim, to add about this?
Did you happen to mention that we had a weekly rhythm with Michaela?
No, I didn't.
Yeah, so that one of the really, I thought, was critical elements of this is that we had a calendar appointment every week with the executive director, and I had many of those meetings on, riding a ferry on my way home from work, right, getting on the phone, but at least we would tag up on a regular basis. We had to cancel occasionally, but it was nice because it kept us connected, it kept us involved. We could hear, we could provide some feedback. And so we stayed engaged with the leader along the way, and then we could gauge when the next activity or event needed to take place based on that feedback. So really, I think in this case was a really crucial element that we included. So
yeah, that was good input, because that was, I think, one of the things is part of that relationship building or that partnership we had was really evident in the executive director taking her time, an hour a week to meet with us and talk about what's going on, what our next steps were. And this is drew right into some of these relationship building activities that we had, and we were being able to very timely address some of these issues or strengthen some of these elements that they were asking us to. So we're getting to the end of this, but what are the benefits of a community service project? And this, to me, was really, you know, it's great that we're helping the community around us, but the professional growth was just tremendous. There's a lot of learning that we had. And ultimately, you know, I can say I had fun, I learned, and I made a difference. And I know there's a lot of different reasons why people join community service projects that we offer from ISPI. But I mean, you get a chance to mentor others. You get a chance to work with others. You get to gain some skills. You know, companies these days, they're looking for not just the performance improvement skill set, but how do you partner with others and work together? And this just opens up that door to kind of show, hey, these are some of those softer skills. And not just, yeah, I can work with people and I'll tell you an experience. You got to live this and you can actually point back to it. And the individuals can, you know, provide recommendations as well. So the other items where we were able to take risks, and I like this part, where Tim and I were always learning. And sometimes he'd have an idea or he'd have a technique that I didn't know, and vice versa. So we were able to implement that, learn from it. And then there's times where we said, hey, you know what, we read about this or we've experienced it, but we've never led it. Let's try this new approach. And I will say Tim and I are both very experienced facilitators. So if things did happen to not turn out the way we were expecting it to, we were able to redirect and keep it on course. However, we just got to try so many different techniques that we wouldn't have normally tried through this project. The other item is, if you guys are working in the corporate world, a lot of times they have a recipe that you need to follow. They have this process, they know it works. And so it's kind of a little cookie cutter-ish where, you know, you're going to go for this performance needs analysis. You're going to do it this way. You're going to have these specific tools and only these tools to use. And this project allowed you the freedom to, you know, architect it the way you thought it should be worked. You got to try things, like I mentioned, in a different way, different skill sets. I mean, I thought it was fabulous because I was able to take kind of all those constraints off of what we do at work and kind of say, hey, this is how I would do it if I didn't have somebody else kind of looking over my shoulder.
Yeah, I'll echo that. That was the experience for me was life-changing. I learned a lot about myself over the couple of years that we supported the organization. And by the way, we're not done supporting. We're still interconnected with them. What I never saw coming was at the same time, simultaneous to this project, I was also working on my doctorate. Next Tuesday, I defend my proposal for a study on the leaders of executive nonprofit victim support organization, executive directors of nonprofit victim support organizations. So this project actually drove my study for my doctorate. And when I'm done, I hope to produce a model for leadership behaviors that will of effective executive directors of these types of nonprofits because of their unique situation. So on a personal level, I can't begin to describe the impact that this has had, not to mention that the relationships we've built with each of the individuals in the organization along the way, and a lot of the associates to the organization, a lot of the outsiders, supporters, advocates, because there's a lot of community involvement that goes along with this. Just an amazing experience, and I could never have seen it coming, and so grateful for having it happen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's, it's not just about the experiences that we have, in the personal development, but it's giving back to that community, and it's being able to support them. So that was, if you guys do have an opportunity, I would say get involved in a community service project. And we have a couple different ways that you guys can get involved. You can email us at volunteer@ispi.org, And we do have a project that's going on right now, and that is the Reap Goodness project. And they're looking, it's a little bit more, I'll say, instructional design oriented at this point in time. But I know that they're going to have some additional opportunities coming up within their project, so we can get you guys involved with that. If you guys have an idea and you want to lead your own project, go ahead and let's, talk about it, and we can help support. And with today's day and age, with everything being virtual, we're no longer geographically constrained. And that is, I think, a really awesome, advantage to what we're doing today. Not that COVID, is where we want to be, but it has really given people that opportunity and the chance to say, we can do things virtually now. We don't have to always be face to face. So there are opportunities for you guys to get involved. So I know this was the presentation I had. I want to open it up to any questions or comments that you guys have.
I have one. In thinking about what you described and how you went about it and when all this happened, I have a question that's sort of like two parts. One, what would you and I guess Tim and some others do differently now in this kind of environment? How would you approach this project differently? And second, what would they have to do differently now in this kind of environment? How does their plan and their vision and all that, how does that have to be modified?
Great question. Yeah. The virtual world, so Leanne and I continue our work professionally at Boeing virtually. So we're doing that part and learning every day on how we can be effective virtually. To take it to the level of because the organization is running virtually as well right now, and they're actually spread out quite a ways in some cases. So you have to reevaluate what that looks like in the future. You have to make an assumption at this point that the virtual world is going to be integrated into what we do in the future. So I think that has to be considered in terms of your strategy and your vision. But you never are going to get away from the human factor of a victim needs support in a court system, in a mental health capacity, in just basic information gathering. Some of that you can do virtually, but some of that needs to be done in person, and there's got to be a way to facilitate both.
Right.
So it's really finding that balance between the new world and the existing world and the new world that has become part of who we are now.